George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
All trussed up and nowhere to go. Believe it or not, exactly 1 year ago this day, somebody called Liz Truss became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And in the lifetime of a lettuce, she was gone. We haven't heard or seen much of her since, although the people in Taiwan have. They put her up for 5 long days and nights. I wonder what she first saw in the the good people of Taiwan. And Bathhouse Barry Obama has sex with men and smokes from a crack pipe. I don't know if at the same time or not. At least that's the claim made by an alleged former lover who seems now to have no teeth in his mouth in his conversation with Tucker Carlson. I suggest that's going to be a big one. The audience, I mean. And, of course, the war drags on. But Prince Andrew's making a comeback. What do you think about that? Well, it's all coming up over the next 2 hours, so fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Was it all a dream? It seems like it to me now. This mousy adulteress, this mouse who padded around the Parliament when I was in it without saying a word or evincing the slightest idea of an idea or any kind of, presence. Je ne sais quoi, she had none. And yet, to my absolute astonishment, she beat all comers and became the Prime Minister of Britain. Somebody, a wiseacre indeed, put a bet on that the lifetime of a lettuce on a supermarket shelf would be longer than the premiership of Liz Truss. And so, indeed, it was. She didn't even last 40 days as Prime Minister of Britain. Now, I think that made her the shortest living Prime Minister, but that's because the only person shorter was shot dead in the House of Commons. As far as I know, nobody served less time in number 10 Downing Street than Liz Truss. She'll be remembered, if at all, for one thing. She was the last person to see Her Majesty the Queen alive. She called on Her Majesty at the palace, and 2 days later, Her Majesty was dead. Now, I'm not suggesting anything improper, any more than I'm suggesting that the fact that Barack Obama's 2 chefs have both drowned at an early age in mysterious circumstances is, well, just one of those coincidences. They're certainly outing Barry Obama, Bathhouse Barry, they call him now, and I wonder why. Personally speaking, I have not the slightest interest in whom Barack Obama has or does sleep with, neither on the physical attributes or lack of them of Michael or Michelle, his good wife, I'm happy to call her. I'm not remotely interested in other people's sex lives as long as they don't do it in front of the children. And don't frighten the horses unless you absolutely have to. But the fact that these things are now emerging about St. Barack has got me suspicious. After all, this man, Larry Summers, I think his name is, who's mysteriously lost all his teeth, has been telling this tale for long enough, and no one picked it up. But now everybody's talking about it, as John Voight might put it in the Midnight Cowboy. I don't know why I said that. Hurry on. The image of this toothless man with St. Barack may or may not be arousing to you. It certainly isn't to me. But I'm wondering if the tectonic plates are shifting. I'm wondering if it's true that St. Barack is the real president of the United States, working Joe Biden from behind, if I can use that term. Perhaps I shouldn't have. If you get my drift, perhaps he's the one pulling the strings, I said, in the White House. And it's now time to move Joe Biden out. After all, there are only so many embarrassing videos that even the ruling elite in the Democratic Party can possibly imagine will stand them in good stead in the forthcoming election, no matter how many ballot box stuffers they have on the payroll, no matter how many breakdowns in the electronic voting machines they have pre-arranged. It will simply not be credible to anyone if this man, Joe Biden, were to win another election for another 4-year term next year in November. That's patently absurd. In fact, in parenthesis, when you look at the brain freezes being suffered by the American political leadership, it is, if you believed in karma, it is truly karmic. Not only is Joe Biden pinning a medal on a guy at a medal awards ceremony yesterday, a hero, and then walking right off the stage as the guy salutes him before he even has chance to say thanks and before any benediction is said upon the honorable ceremony. The way he walked out made it clear to me that the man's really not there. Chance the gardener from Peter Sellers' last film being there was far more compos mentis, cognizant of where and what he was than Joe Biden is demonstrating every single day. Every day, even when he's on holiday. Who told them to do that? Who told them to turn up at his beachfront home again this week? He's already spent more than 40% of his presidency on holiday, and there he is again, having not visited yet East Palestine that he promised to visit in February of this year, and where upwards of 6,000 people still have no clean drinking water because of the crumbling country that this beach body is so fond of. He's not Charles Atlas. He's not the 6-stone weakling getting the sand kicked in his face. He's just a sad old man that is being abused by his own family for money, for fame, for limousines, for the Secret Service protection. I don't know what it is that they are so desperate to hold on to. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because at least now he's got the keys to the safe. And the secrets that are in the safe might not be safe for anyone in the Biden family. I'm just guessing, just brainstorming, which may have been what Mitch McConnell was doing, again in the corridors of power in Washington, in the Capitol building, for the second time in 3 weeks, in front of every camera in America, the minority leader, the leader of the Republican Party literally froze on screen for 2 whole minutes. Now, trust me, in television time, 2 minutes is an aeon. It is an epoch. And he stood there, his brain completely frozen. Mind you, his doctor looked him over the next day and gave him a clean bill of health. Fighting fit, he said Mitch was. In fact, he's as fit as the President of the United States. And therein lies the problem. The gerontocracy that runs the United States cannot possibly be running the United States. I mean, I know I have a rather low opinion of the ruling elite in the United States, but they cannot be that bad. These people must be there for an other purpose. And it may well be, as I said right at the beginning, that they are getting ready to change the guard. Their problem is a bit like Richard Nixon with Spiro Agnew as his vice president. You remember, famously, he said, nobody's going to shoot me with this guy next in line. Well, that's the problem that America has now if they're getting ready to put Joe Biden, metaphorically speaking, to sleep, to politically euthanize him. That means President Kamala Harris. It also means that Kamala gets to pick the next vice president. Yeah. That might be Hillary Clinton. Or it might be Michael Obama. Might even be Barack Obama. It could be anyone, but that anyone is going to have to put Donald Trump out of the game first. Because right at this minute, whether at liberty, at large, or behind bars, there is nobody that can stop a second presidency of Donald J. Trump. All the polls are clear. All the crowds are clear. All the vibe on the streets is clear. No one can beat Trump, and therefore they have to stop him before he gets to the starting gate. They're trying to put him behind bars, even though that does not stop him, though will undoubtedly make campaigning rather more difficult in handcuffs and in an orange jumpsuit. But given the success of that mugshot that you're looking at right now, which has raised him millions of dollars and put him up 5% in the polls, I wouldn't guarantee that the jailhouse pictures would not also boost his fortunes. I think myself, it would be cleaner for them all round if he was terminated with extreme prejudice in the way that they have already done to Jack Kennedy and to his brother Robert F. Kennedy as he marched ineluctably towards the White House. I've said this before. I know that Donald Trump has occasionally watched this show. Invest your money in a crack Russian protection team now. Hire them. Americans of Russian extraction. Hire them now, Donald, because you cannot trust your Secret Service detail any more than Jack Kennedy was able to trust his. So many things to talk about tonight, and I've perhaps dwelt overly on Truss and Trump and Biden and the gang that couldn't shoot straight in Washington. I should turn to the war, because you'll have lost track, as I have, the number of game-changing military weapons that were first never going to be, and then maybe would be, and then only through a surrogate would be, and then finally by the big powers in NATO directly delivered to the Kiev gang, which is falling apart, and where, according to the Pentagon itself, $6 billion worth of weapons are unaccounted for, paid for by the American taxpayer and delivered to the gang in Kiev. But the weapons just keep on burning. The weapons don't change any game at all. In 3 months of so-called counter-offensive, the Ukrainians have recaptured virtually zero territory. But they have lost another 65,000 dead men, some of whom were visited rather nobly by Blinken today in Kiev in their cemeteries, to which he, Blinken, and his gang in Washington actually consigned them. There was the Abrams tank, which burned like a Roman candle on fireworks night. Then there was the unvanquishable Chieftain tank, delivered by the United Kingdom, but not to war zones. Don't want them in war zones, only in safe areas, like there's any safe areas in the Ukraine. That went up today. It melted in front of our eyes yesterday. It was hit by Russian shells and it burst into flames, presumably incinerating the crew inside who, poor fools, had believed the propaganda that this tank was impregnable, unvanquishable. The Defense Secretary, I can hardly believe I'm saying this, Mr. Green, aka Grant Shapps, when asked on the radio this morning if we'd be sending another chieftain to replace it, replied unequivocally and shortly with the word no. It is an utter humiliation to the Western military-industrial complex that despite fleecing us all for billions, uncountable billions, record numbers of billions, we don't have a war machine worth speaking of. In Britain, our entire armed forces could comfortably fit into the Aston Villa football ground, Villa Park, which I choose as a metaphor because it's not the biggest stadium in Britain. In the United States, generals are parading around in high heels and lipstick. I don't mean the women generals, I mean the male generals. In the United States, they're carefully polishing their pronouns in the way we used to blanco our webbing and our belts. They're polishing their political correctness in the way that we used to shine our boots. As a very knowledgeable man put it on here on MOATS just the other night, a former Colonel Tony Schaefer, as he put it, the United States Army could not successfully fight France. And if you knew anything about French martial powers in World War II, you'd realize that is really quite a statement. Quite a statement indeed. So where did all the money go? Where did all those billions, almost $1 trillion in the case of the United States, what did it buy? It didn't buy weapons that are any use on the battlefield. That's obvious in the armor. It will be obvious in the aging, long ago discarded F-16s if they ever arrive on the battlefield. It's true that the very historic, unchanging, nuclear-tipped, depleted uranium shells, it's true that they will leave cancer in the ground and in the water and in the children of Ukraine for generations to come, but that's not much to boast about. The truth is, again this evening, Russia is on the advance in the direction of Kupiansk, and the British and American supplied armor is burning on the Ukrainian steppe. The heavy rains are about to fall this autumn, followed by the winter snows in Ukraine. The government in Kiev is falling apart. The defense minister has been sacked and sent as ambassador to London. The new defense minister was quickly outed on social media, masturbating himself into a camera, presumably for others to enjoy, if that's the phrase. This gang of thieves, this gang of no-marks, this gang of lowlifes in power in Kiev are not much longer for this political world. Be sure of that. If they're not overthrown by their people, they sure as hell are going to be overthrown by their army, which has begun to vote with its feet in large-scale surrenders right across the battlefield, right across the line of control, which is 25% into the territory of Ukraine, but it will not end there. The number of people flying the flag for Ukraine in Western society has fallen faster than a whore's drawers. They cannot be found anywhere. Anywhere. Take a look at your social media. Look for the blue and yellow that was once hegemonic on social media. Go out in the street with a collecting bucket and collect for more arms to Ukraine and see if you hear a clink or two. Western politicians, one after the other, are beginning to fall as a result of the economic ruin that they have invited onto their own economies, their own countries, in worship of Saint Zelensky, who's no more of a saint than Bathhouse Barry ever was. Much more of this coming up over the next hour and 40 minutes. I promise you, this is going to be the mother of all talk shows. Do you know how many people watch MSNBC? If this was a normal business, it would be out of business long ago. Do you know how many people watch CNN? We are in danger of fixating too much on the liberal hegemony of media outlets with infinitesimally small viewership. This show that you are watching has 10 times the viewership, 10 times the viewership of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV with its budget of billions. So, let's not lose hope. Let's be our own media. You're right, not everybody watches me, watches those other people that you watch. Well, it's your job, and it's everybody else's job that's watching this and agrees with me this evening. It's your job to tell as many other people as you possibly can what we are all about, how to find us, encourage them, and check up afterwards whether they took your advice, and if they didn't, encourage them all over again. Have you any idea how we would multiply if everybody watching this did that? The best part of 2 million people will watch this program over the next 7 days. If those nearly 2 million spoke to one other person, we'd be 3 million if their advice was taken. And so on and exponentially on, it is possible to go. It's in our hands. Let's do it. I can't do much more than what I'm doing. I need you, the audience, to spread the word.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I should have mentioned actually how ready to rumble we are. On Sunday, our show was watched on Rumble alone by 141,000 people, which is twice as many people as watched it on YouTube. Do the math. I don't know whether we're being suppressed in one and boosted in the other. I do know that reputedly Rumble is far less censorious than YouTube. So give Rumble a chance, why don't you? And if someone explains to me what Rumble is, I might even do that myself. We've got a poll running. Has Prince Andrew been redeemed by the royal family? Answer yes or no. I guess this poll comes out of the truly extraordinary news that all the papers, documents around Prince Andrew have been locked up for the next 64 years. 64 years. The youngest person watching this right now will be lucky if they're still alive and able to see what it was exactly that Prince Andrew did. And you got to wonder, is this divine intervention in support of Andrew, or is it royal intervention? Have the royals stepped in? After all, they are the law. The law is them. If you get prosecuted, you're being prosecuted by King Charles, no less, not by Rashid Sunak. Has Prince Andrew been redeemed by the royal family? Yes, 38%, yes, 34%, no, 66%, no, 68%. You can vote on my Twitter, on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on the YouTube community poll, or on this YouTube stream. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel. Please, it's very, very important. It's important algorithmically. It doesn't put a tea bag in my cup, but it does change the algorithms. So please subscribe to this channel. Press the bell so you can be notified when I'm on air. And give me the thumbs up if indeed you are enjoying the show. Here are the phone numbers to call. If you're in the US or Canada, remember it's toll free, and the number is +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, equally it will cost you nothing at all. 08081 965522. And if you are anywhere else in the world, it's 0044 203 966 2625. Now, our man in Moscow, well, he's America's man, really, but nonetheless, we regard him as part of our family. He is the journalist, broadcaster, and all-round good egg, Donald Courter, who joins us now. Donald, the war drags on, of course, and Blinken is there visiting the war graves now, but they're short of intervention, and you've got to guess that in an election year, that's not going to happen. It could all go so disastrously wrong. What is the point in the United States continuing to throw good money after bad at a regime in Kiev that seems to be coming apart at the seams?
Well, first of all, George, thanks a lot for having me back on the show. I mean, I think the real point from the beginning really has not been any sort of Ukrainian victory in this conflict. It's just been to make this conflict as costly and difficult for Russia as possible before the inevitable victory of Russia. And I think, even the United States understands that. I mean, it's not possible for the Kiev regime to actually have a victory against Russia in this conflict, even with all this backing from NATO in terms of weapons and foreign mercenaries that are going to support the Ukrainian military in this conflict. I think the ultimate goal is just to make this as difficult for Russia as possible, even though we're seeing how the Ukrainian counteroffensive obviously has not met expectations. They thought it was going to be more successful than the previous one, where Ukraine was able to take back some territory in its Kharkov region. But we're seeing that it's basically stalled. It's not nearly as successful as it was projected by Western experts or the Ukrainians themselves. In fact, during this Ukrainian counteroffensive, we're seeing Russian offensives and advances, specifically in the Kharkov region of Ukraine, where Russian forces are just several kilometers away from the major city of Kupiansk, which is a communications hub between the pro-Ukrainian authorities in Kharkov region with Kiev. I mean, if Russian forces take that town, which it's looking like they're going to, they would have an open shot to the capital of Kharkov region and be able to take back essentially all of the territory that they lost during the first Ukrainian counteroffensive that we saw last year. So, you know, I mean, we've seen limited successes. It looks like I'm not really sure what exactly Antony Blinken hopes to achieve with this trip, except to maybe try and raise morale among the people that the United States is using for cannon fodder in this conflict against Russia.
Yeah, though you'd be in a bad place if you were relying on Antony Blinken to raise your morale. He has all the charisma of a wet lettuce, as we say. The outgoing defense minister in Kiev, now ambassador to London, could have been worse, but could have been better. He said that they're spending 100 million a day in Ukraine on the war, and almost all of that, he said, is coming from overseas, which means it's coming from your people and my people and the French people and the Germans and the Slovaks and the French and the Italians and so on. 100 million a day is a billion every 10 days in a war that is now well over 500 days old. What a waste of money, never mind the blood and the destruction. You wonder when the worm's going to turn, don't you?
Well, I completely agree with you that it's a complete waste of money, but that's not even, I would say that's not even the worst part of it, just throwing money at this war that is obviously unwinnable for Ukraine. But let's think about the fact that billions of dollars of Western tax dollars are going to this country that's one of the most corrupt governments. It has one of the most corrupt governments in Europe. And aside from the fact that it's super corrupt and the fact that tons of these weapons that are going to Ukraine as well are going to end up in the hands of terrorists or, you know, radical groups in other places of the world, we can also look at the fact that, you know, it's just such a joke that the West is supporting Ukraine on the basis of calling it a democracy when all of the political opposition in Ukraine has been banned. And also, I actually did a report about this today at RT, the fact that there was recently an interview in The Economist with the former head of the Ukrainian security services. And in this interview with the former head of the Ukrainian security services, he talks about how the SBU, or the Ukrainian security services, they formed an assassination program back in 2015 when all this was going on with Ukraine's so-called anti-terrorist operation in Donbass, when basically anyone who potentially had some pro-Russian views or didn't even agree with Kiev's political course could have been considered a terrorist. They created this assassination program back in 2015 when they were where they were organizing and still are organizing death squads to kill people in Ukraine that, you know, are suspected of potentially supporting Russia and just don't agree with Kiev's political course. One example is one mayor who was actually a mayor of a town in Ukraine's Kharkov region. He was killed by Ukrainian death squads for being accused of collaborating with the Russians, but he was killed by a car bomb. This is a guy that never took up arms against the Kiev government. He was a civilian, he was a politician, and he had pro-Russian views. And for that, they killed him by a car bombing. It's absolutely crazy that the West continues to call Ukraine a democracy. They talk about potentially integrating Ukraine into the European Union. We've got even one Ukrainian official, I think it was the deputy prime minister of European and Euro-Atlantic integration, saying that they're planning on joining the European Union even before the end of before the end of Kiev's conflict with Russia, which is absolutely an absurd thing to suggest, especially when, like I said, we've got this Ukrainian government assassinating people who aren't even combatants because they're suspected of potentially supporting Russia inside Ukraine. And of course, we know about the other instances outside of this official assassination program where, for example, Daria Dugina, Russian journalist, not a combatant, she was assassinated by the Ukrainian security services. They had several other assassination attempts, like on Prilepin, who was pro-Russian writer. They tried to kill him. So it's obvious that the Ukrainian government is carrying out these terrorist acts, assassinations against civilians, all the while where, like I said before, they've banned all their political opposition. It's not possible to speak against the government in any official capacity there. And we've also got the Ukrainian, actually, I forgot specific. It was the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, who was just recently saying that elections could potentially destabilize Ukraine where it is right now in the conflict. So, we're looking at a country that the West is throwing all this money to, calling it a democracy, that might not even have elections.
Well, I mentioned about the government coming apart at the seams. It's not just the defense secretary that has been sacked and now beginning to talk more freely, but we know that revolutions eat their children. This is a case of the revolution eating its father. Kolomoisky, the billionaire who bankrolled at one and the same time the Nazi Azov battalion and the then putative Jewish president Zelensky, he basically bought the presidency for Zelensky. He invented the television show in which Zelensky played the president of Ukraine. He's now just been arrested by the SBU in Ukraine for the theft of billions of dollars from the Privat Bank. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, it's not really a surprising situation because, like I said earlier, I mean, Ukraine has, even before this conflict began, been known for corruption scandals, and it's been known to be one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. And, a lot of that money that he was probably siphoning off is just, American and British taxpayer dollars and pounds. And this is all the majority of the, for example, military budget, at least that Ukraine is enjoying right now, is pumped up by Western taxpayer dollars. If I remember correctly, even before the military operation began, Ukraine's military budget was around $5 billion, which is very small in comparison to the total military budget of Russia. And it's only because of this money that is coming from the West into Ukraine and all these weapons that they're able to, continue to drag out this conflict for as long as possible, which is obviously the goal of the West, to hurt Russia. But again, I mean, it's really not surprising. And, we don't even know how much other money, how many other corruption scandals are going on, but that the people who are behind them are just good enough at covering it up. And how many of these weapons are being sent to, or sold to terrorist groups around the world. We've already heard some officials talking about how some of these Western supplied weapons are ending up in the hands of terrorist groups in Africa. It's already beginning to surface. But the real repercussions of all this money and all these weapons going to Ukraine, they're only really going show themselves in years in the future, probably when we have another big conflict in God knows where, you know?
How is morale in Moscow amongst the ordinary people? Are they confident that their country will prevail? Or is there an anxiety that this has gone on rather longer than some thought it might?
To be honest, I would say either. For most people, probably morale is still high. I mean, there's nothing really distressing going on for the Russians in the conflict right now. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, so-called counteroffensive, is going on when the Russians are actually advancing. So in that respect, a lot of people are, still optimistic about it. But I would say the economic effect that the conflict has had on Russia has been very, very minuscule. And so a lot of people have simply, just got on with their lives. It's not really having a big effect on them. Right now, for those who are in the know about politics, many are really thinking about the Black Sea grain deal, because that's what a lot of, Putin recently met with Erdogan. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, recently met with Hakan Fidan, actually, his name is, which is the Turkish foreign minister. They met in Moscow to discuss this stuff, reviving the Black Sea grain deal potentially, because after all, Russia suspended it because the West didn't fulfill its obligations. They said they were going to lift sanctions on Russian exports of fertilizer and food, and that never happened, even though Russia fulfilled its side of the bargain, protecting Ukrainian grain exports, even though the vast majority of it didn't go to the countries that actually need it, which was the whole point of this deal in the first place. But so that's really what a lot of people who are in the know about politics are talking about right now in Russia. Nobody's really worried that the conflict's going to be lost by Russia. I mean, things are looking pretty grim for Kiev right now. Of course, there's the concern about the ruble. Obviously, the ruble has significantly depreciated over the last month or two, but people really are optimistic about it going back, I would say, because a lot of it is tied not even to structural circumstances connected to the economy, but really the price of the international price of oil. And I'm sure when Russia starts to make very significant advances in the conflict, that whole situation is probably going to change as well.
Well, and the price of oil rose today above $90 a barrel for the first time in a long time. And that's good news for Russia and for Saudi Arabia, for that matter. Bad news for the rest of us. You do have one benefit that you didn't see coming. You've got 5 million Ukrainians now living in Russia that basically fled to Russia for comfort, for safety when the war broke out. But you're now going to get another infusion of those, because Western European countries are now sending any Ukrainian man between 16 and 60 currently living in Western Europe, sending them back to Ukraine so that they can be drafted and sent to the front line. That's what we call European hospitality. And of course, ironically, therefore, the only place that these men, or 16-year-old boys or 60-year-old old men, can be safe from being drafted is to go to Russia or Belarus. And many of them are right now packing to do just that. So prepare for another large number of Ukrainians seeking shelter and asylum in Russia, Donald.
Yeah, and to be honest, we could say the same about even a lot of the Ukrainian refugees that fled to Europe and the United States as well. I mean, obviously they've been used as an object of propaganda by the mainstream media, covering this refugee crisis like they're fleeing big bad Russia. But many of them, I mean, conscription has been in place in Ukraine since the beginning of this, the Russian special military operation. And a lot of people have just been trying to flee that. They don't want to take part in this war, whether they blame Russia, obviously some of them blame their own government. I mean, a lot of people still know about what happened in Donbass over the 8 years that preceded Russia's military operation. But to say that all of these Ukrainians that fled to the European Union or America are, angry at Russia or something is really distorting the truth. Actually, I have one Ukrainian friend who lives in America who is hosting Ukrainian refugees in her own home, and she says that they're not anti-Russian. They don't want to get a knock on the door by the SBU in the middle of the night and have them, dragged over to become cannon fodder on the front line for a war that they, don't believe in. They don't really necessarily agree with the Kiev government. They don't really have any sort of, hard feelings against Russia either. They just don't want to be sucked into this Ukrainian meat grinder, essentially. So it's also important to understand that it's not like that the Ukrainian refugees that even went to the West also don't have sort of one worldview that's anti-Russian, like the Western mainstream media is trying to convince us that they have.
Donald Courter, as always, a pleasure to chew the fat with you. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Phone numbers again, US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344, toll free. And again, free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081965522. And the rest of the world is 44203 966 2625. I'll be right back in a minute. Stay tuned. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Has Prince Andrew been redeemed by the royal family? Yes or no? Get voting on our poll. Comments after Donald's wonderful interview from Nicholas Byrne, while Zelensky is dressed in women's clothes singing Springtime for Hitler and Germany. You think he's joking? And Grapentine says the Ukrainians never had and still don't have any aerial cover. So sending boys to a fight without aerial cover is a suicide job. This is disgustingly cruel. And Mourns Lad says little Ukraine, it was the biggest army in Europe until it fought Russia. And even with massive NATO input, this large army has been hammered. On the line from Texas is Prince to talk about Trump. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere. Prince in Texas on Trump. Go ahead, Prince.
Hey, George, how you doing?
Good, brother, good. Go ahead.
The scramble over Trump, I look at all the fake liberals, over Trump. It's really irritating. But speaking as an African or an African American, I also have one thing which is very sad because I was very scared when Trump was elected in 2016. I was scared because of the whole media hysteria. But when I look at the people who are against this guy, actually makes me want to vote for the guy. Actually, I'll vote for the guy because if you look at the people who are against this guy, You look at all the neocons, look at even the head of the one of the Republicans group which was formed to go against Trump and MAGA. The head there was a convicted pedophile. So the people who are against him, the worst of the worst, the people who have never borne any consequences to any of the savages that's committed around the world, and even here in this country, they are the same ones who are pretending to be to be anti-Trump. So it makes me think there's something to the guy, because I think he's probably the only person. Sometimes good things come from bad places. The only person who can actually stand up to these monsters. Yeah, and also, I'm also looking at all the schools in Africa.
Of the worst. Yeah, go ahead. Finally, go ahead.
Yeah, finally, I'll just wrap up. So all the schools in Africa, I keep on hearing these people talk about Western democracy. The thing is, there's not even Western democracy in the West. Let's start from there. Secondly, all the schools, Niger has just asked France to leave. They asked French ambassadors to leave. The people who are fighting Ukraine because they say Ukraine is being invaded by a small country. These people refuse to leave Niger when the government has asked them to leave. These are the people talking about big countries being bullies, and they claim to fight Russia because they care about democracy. But all the things in Africa, they
democracy, shamocracy, it's all a farce. As you said brilliantly, Prince, Western democracy, there's not even democracy in the West, never mind Western democracy anywhere else. But there's a legend on the line, that's why I had to ask you to make way. It is the professor himself, Simon, in Florida. Welcome back, Simon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Galloway, and greetings to all of your worldwide audience. This is a subject that you've already touched very briefly upon with the rising international price of oil. But what many people may not have quite followed was that has been brought about directly by the Russians and the Saudi Arabians. And they have done so whilst Saudi Arabia was hosting a visit by Barbara Temporary De-Escalation Leaf and Brett McGurk, acting personally on behalf of President Biden, trying to achieve the Saudi-Israeli normalization. That was followed up by a personal phone call from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to President Putin, in which they confirmed not only the extension of the cuts as the two largest OPEC plus producers for the reduction in their daily oil production all the way through until the end of the year, but also agreed that they were going to take further steps, quote, to stabilize the international oil market, which you can be jolly certain is going to hit most average American and British and Europeans directly in the pocket over the coming months. But they also expressed how they wish to further the bilateral relations between the two countries, build upon the economic partnership now available to them both being members of BRICS. Now, this is whilst the Americans are very forthrightly trying to get the Saudis to downgrade their relationship with both Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. So given that these representatives of President Biden were in the country, in Saudi Arabia, when they did this, and not for the first time, but actually for the third time, this was an extreme insult to the United States. And just today, it's been reported in the Tehran Times that when the Turkish foreign minister last weekend went to go and meet with the Iranians, they've actually cobbled together what has been called a peace triangle and a roadmap between Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. And it's being described as one of, quote, the most strategic decisions by the authorities of these countries. And even though the public framework is mainly about economics, it's very clearly being indicated now by the Iranians that it's their intent that these public rapprochements will in fact extend into all other aspects of the relationships between these three countries, which it would appear have privately agreed amongst themselves that they will now be the three power brokers in the Middle East, completely excluding the United States. And as you and I, with the audience's close attention, have discussed these huge shifts in the global logistics worldwide and how all the trade routes are being reoriented as Russia has been dislocated from the West and as the United States has been going through this process of de-risking and or decoupling from China. A little railway link called the Sham Lam Sheh Baza Rail Link was just started this week. And in the Iranian press, it's describing it as these unique economic opportunities, the north-south and east-west corridor chains can generate more wealth for Iran than oil for the whole country of Iran. So this is how important what you and I are trying to explain to people about the significance of these logistical chains. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars per year for decades and entire reorientations of the power relationships in the entire Middle East.
You always cheer me up, Simon, and I'm grateful, as always, for your call. The Saudis had decided, and this was communicated in a call from the Crown Prince to President Putin, they had decided to continue their cut of 1 million barrels per day, and the Russian leader confirmed that he would continue the cut of 300,000 barrels per day, which has immediately forced the price of crude on the Brent index above $90 per barrel for the first time, as long as I can remember, certainly the first time in years, not months. That will be extremely good news for Russia and for Saudi Arabia, and presumably also the other oil-producing, oil-exporting countries, of which Iran is a very significant one, but also the Emirates and Kuwait and Venezuela will all greatly benefit from this huge jump in the price of oil. I'm going to talk later in the show about the huge jump in the price of uranium in Niger, and you ain't going to believe the numbers I'm going to tell you. One more call before the break. Nathan in Seattle on Bathhouse Barry Obama. Go ahead, Nathan.
Hey, George. I am quite disappointed in your making fun of Barry Obama and having consensual sex with that crack-headed gentleman, because you know that's like a step up from most presidents who screw hundreds of millions of Americans without our consent. I'm not saying Barack Obama isn't part of that crew. Maybe he paid this guy to say they had consensual sex so he could seem like a more stand-up person. However,
well, I'll tell you what, Nathan. I heard, Nathan, wait a minute. I heard that 51 intelligence officers have already said that Nathan is Russian disinformation. Does he look like it to you? He's wearing red.
I definitely could believe that this is false because, like I said, I find it hard to believe that Barack Obama would screw any American with permission. I was one of the people who was fooled by the Democrats once to vote for Barack Obama 2008. Shame on them because I wasn't fooled again. And to your point of Barack Obama secretly controlling Joe Biden from behind, I think it's the other way around. It's like an old video of Joe Biden saying, talking about the possibility of Barack Obama being killed while in office as soon as he was nominated president. So it's just, This is like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to all the stuff that he's done. I mean, people getting upset about him being gay or feeling any kind of way. That would literally be the least worst thing he's done. He's a war criminal. He should be in The Hague. We need to pull out of the Hague Invasion Act so all of our presidents can do the perp walk, bring them all to justice, all the corporations that run them. Barack Obama, he was the face of imperialism, so we can go into brown countries, and we think that America has their back, while Barack Obama smoothly robs them, overthrows their leaders, and brings slave markets back to Africa. So, I wish he was just having sex with that crackhead the entire time of his presidency, and we would have a better country if that was the case.
Nathan in Seattle insists that having sex and smoking crack is the only two good things about Saint Barry Obama. Now, we've got a poll running. Has Prince Andrew been redeemed by the royal family? Yes or no is the question. Quite binary, if you get my drift. And so far, the great majority of you say no. He hasn't. Jim Shepton, though, asks, should Andrew drop the prince? That might have been a better question. Might have gotten more votes in at this stage of the evening. Now, we had a cameo appearance, necessarily short because of technical difficulties, a few weeks ago with an ambassador, the Right Honourable Tony Kevin, a former Australian ambassador that was so good, people have been asking ever since, when is he coming back? Well, he's coming back after this short break. Stay tuned.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. These type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is, to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we've got a terrific event coming up at the TUC, that's Trades Union Congress for younger viewers. I mean, anybody under the age of 60, really. The Trade Union Congress Fringe event. Take a look at this terrific lineup that will be speaking at that. It is venue Central Liverpool. We're obviously still guarding our venues to avoid the usual cancel culture rush. What is the role of socialists in the trade union movement? Monday, the 11th of September at 6 p.m. Andy Hudd, a terrific speaker, one of the leadership of ASLEF, the train drivers union. Tosh MacDonald, the former leader of ASLEF, the train drivers union. Lauren Wilson, a very important young woman, colleague of mine. And Chris Williamson, the famous former Labour MP who was drummed out in the false, fake witch hunt just a few years ago. So register online at the TUC Fringe meeting. That's the Workers' Party of Britain. So follow us on all social media portals, please. His Excellency, Tony Kevin, was formerly, amongst other things, Australia's ambassador to Poland. We did speak to him a few weeks ago, but it was so short, people were left desperately hoping for more. And, of course, down under, it's the middle of the night. So I'm particularly grateful to His Excellency Tony Kevin for joining us again on the mother of all talk shows. Ambassador, I was robbed of the opportunity of asking you this last time, but this time is even more apposite, because the extradition of your compatriot, Julian Assange, would appear to be absolutely imminent. It looks like the British have failed the cause of freedom in this case. And it seems like Australia never really got out of the blocks in trying to rescue your own citizen from this trumped-up case, which may very well see him behind bars for the rest of his life. To what do you attribute the Australian government's apparent lackadaisical approach to this?
Good to be back on the show, George, and I look forward to a longer discussion with you on this and other interesting topics. Assange is Australia's shame, our shame that we have not effectively done anything to help him over the last few years. Quite the contrary. In fact, our governments, both of them, have given surreptitious signals to Britain and America, do what you wish with him. We are really compliant with whatever you do. There is a little bit of light in the tunnel. I won't say at the end of the tunnel, but somewhere in the tunnel, there's a multi-party group of Australian MPs going to Washington the next few days to make a last-ditch personal appeal to whoever they can see in the American government to say, release them and end this tragic farce. And that's an important event, I think, even though they are not members of the government. They're backbenchers from different parties, including, interestingly, the former leader of the Nationals Party, Barnaby Joyce, who's quite a colourful character. But anyway, it's a multi-party delegation, and hopefully it may achieve something.
And yet Australia had this enormous leverage. It is, as we discussed last time, albeit briefly, the most obedient satrap of the United States, even to the point of self-harm on a spectacular level. I mean, the self-harm Australia has done to itself over China and the whole AUKUS and the nuclear submarines and all the rest. You'd think, I mean, I was a friend of Bob Hawke for my sins and his. Bob would have had his jacket off, over the chair, sleeves rolled up, and like a trade union negotiator as he was, he'd have said, we're doing all this for you, you buggers. You're going to have to do this one thing for us and give us back Julian Assange. They never made any use of this leverage.
No, they're a very timid bunch. They're terribly fearful of offending, I guess, Biden and the fanatical apparatchiks around Biden. There's this fear that Australia is very vulnerable to American political manipulation at the domestic level. It's a well-founded fear because quite a lot of our political class have been pretty much indoctrinated and subverted by America over the years. And I'm talking about our political class from both major parties. So America showed its power when they destroyed the prime ministership of Gough Whitlam. They showed their power again a short time later when they put thumbs down on Bill Hayden becoming prime minister at the lead of a victorious Labor Party. And I have to add, George, despite your personal admiration for the man, Bob Hawke was America's choice as Australian Prime Minister. And Bob Hawke went on to do a great deal of work for the Americans in terms of the Let My People Go campaign to get Soviet Jews out of Russia and into Israel. So he's not the perfect person in my book by any means, but we could set that aside. It's not an important difference in the context we're in now. We do have to ask ourselves in Australia, where are we going? And unfortunately, our political class is supine, frightened, compliant. There's very little good to see in the Albanese government at the moment, I'm afraid.
Sounds a bit like Downing Street. No, I was making the Bob Hawke point that Bob would never pass up the opportunity to have a good negotiating victory. He was, of course, on many things, highly deficient, and you have adumbrated some of them. I could adumbrate still more. But the one thing he was a trader, was a negotiator. And when you've got a hand like Australia has got, and you're only asking for one thing, to have a journalist released, it's pretty pathetic that they didn't play that hand at all.
It's more than pathetic. It's shameful. It's ridiculous. There is so much anger now in Australia outside government circles. There is a growing radical movement. It's still small, but it's very committed. And I feel proud in my own small way to be a part of it. I'm not much of a person to wave placards at demonstrations. I'm getting a bit old and frail for that. But I try to use my brain and I try to use my pen or my key punching fingers to make a contribution. And there's more and more of us now. I mean, we have some outstanding characters like Caitlin Johnston at Kate Oz on Twitter, who makes a remarkable contribution to the global dialogue. And there are others. John Menachie, who runs the Pearl. Wonderful people. So I feel that there is a little bit of hope for Australia yet. We're not completely on our backs yet.
Well, one hopes not, of course. Let's turn to the problems that other people have. In Ukraine, in the last 72 hours, the defense minister has been fired and sent to be ambassador at the court of St. James in London. His parting shots were carefully camouflaged, but were nonetheless uncomfortable reading for Zelensky. For example, he talked about the cost of this war, gave a figure that will be hair-raising in the capitals of the countries that are paying the $100 million a day. But the new defense minister wasn't even in post when posts of his predilections were all over social media. Kolomoisky, the man who's been the eminence grise in the rise of Zelensky, the man who funded Zelensky at the same time as funding the Azov Nazi battalions, has now been arrested, charged with theft of billions, I'm talking billions, from Privat Bank. There's every sign that things are not hunky-dory in the corridors of power in Kiev. Do you get that sense also?
Yes, I do. I mean, the important thing to note about the government in Kiev is that it's not really a government at all. They're a bunch of crooks, basically, on the American payroll, on the Western payroll. They, in that sense, the departure of Reznikov and his replacement by this improbable Crimean Tatar is unimportant, because if anybody's still running the Ukrainian army, I guess it's Zaluzhny, The Minister for Defense is a non-job. And Zelensky's job, really, apart from its public relations aspects, is a non-job. All the decisions are being made in Washington. And so the only question is, and it's been the question now for weeks, if not months, the Ukrainian so-called government, the Kiev regime, is terminal. But when is it going to be put out of its misery? And we still don't know the answer to that, because I have a little metaphor here, which will be quite offensive to some people, but I will make it because I think it's relevant. The regime in Kiev is looking more and more like the administration of the Gaza Strip, in the sense that they are absolutely powerless to resist a vastly technically and in terms of manpower superior Israeli defense force. Every now and then they boil over and they do something stupid and wasteful of lives, and the retaliation is swift and brutal. And then there's peace for a while, and then it all comes back again, because there's this rage to, if you like, strike out for what they feel is their cause. And so the bloodletting continues very much on one side. That might be Ukraine's future for quite a while, because even though everybody knows the Ukrainian army is defeated, that they can't mount any more offensives, that they don't have the trained manpower to do it, they're just sitting back and licking their wounds. Meanwhile, the Russian army sits behind its incredibly strong fortifications with its crack troops ready to go whenever the order comes from Moscow to go. It's an amazing situation, because we have a total defeat of Kiev already, but like the Black Knight in Monty Python, this legless rolling creature in the ground keeps rolling around and saying, have at you, it's only a flesh wound. I mean, this is Ukraine today. It's terribly sad. I mean, one laughs at the metaphor, but the situation is terribly sad for the people of Ukraine. And how's it going to end? Well, there are several ways it could end.
Well, that's my next question to you. But before we get to that, and sparked by what you said, as all of this was not just predictable, but was predicted, including by me once this whole thing began, and by many people more eminent and qualified than me, it begs the question, are we ruled by fools or by knaves? Fools if they didn't know that it would end this way, knaves if they did know but nonetheless pressed on regardless. What's your take on that?
Both fools and knaves. Excuse me just a moment. Blighty, go upstairs now. Go on. Don't come in again. Sorry, a bit of domestic interruption. Fools and knaves. They didn't know. They did know that Ukraine was vastly outnumbered and outclassed from the very beginning, but they somehow believed in this American dream that we're the good guys. Shazam, Shazam! Somehow we will come through this. They lived on vain hope. And knaves, because essentially they don't care. However much Ukraine suffers, it's essentially going to be part of the Russian world anyway. So the more it enters into the Russian world wounded and damaged, the happier they are, basically. And this is the ruthlessness of these people. And, one has to go back to the treatment of the American African slave population, to the treatment of the indigenous American Native Americans, to the treatment of the Philippines in the 1890s, of Cuba. These are a ruthless imperialist elite, and I think they're very like the Romans, actually. I've been reading a lot about the Roman Empire lately. There is this sense of self-worth, this implacable determination to prevail, this sense that we are better than other people. And we can either cajole, bribe, or beat them into submission for as long as we wish. The Ukraine war has become symbolic of a much larger issue, of course, which is the issue of the revolt of the global south and leading countries like Russia and China against this awful hegemony. And so we're living in the most historic moment, but poor Ukraine is at the fulcrum of it.
Let me put to you finally, Ambassador, the question in a way you put to me, the penultimate question of how's this all going to end? I thought in the beginning it would end in the partition of the country along the river Dnipro, but as the months have gone by and the level of commitment of the Russians has grown and grown, and the popular support at home, I no longer believe that that would be regarded by the Russian public and by the military itself as a sufficient gain for all the pain that has been caused and indeed endured. And that therefore it is now much more likely that the partition, if indeed there is a partition at all, will have to include the entire coast of the south of Ukraine, and of course including the historic city of Odessa. I no longer see any ending to this war without Odessa becoming once again a Russian city, leaving a rump, stump, landlocked entity in the west of Ukraine, which would then be, at the very least, vulnerable to incursion by the Poles, who have long regarded the western part of Ukraine as being actually part of Poland. What say you?
I'll go right back to the beginning of your question. And when I get to the last part, I hope I remember to get to the last part. I want to give you a little anecdote from nameless friends of mine who've been in Russia recently, people of Russian background. What they brought back to me was a very strong impression of a resolute and determined Russia, which has swung behind the need to prosecute this war to a proper conclusion, not to leave the embers which could fan into another war a few years down the track. I agree totally with your view that the idea of a partition down the Dnipro, leaving a very strong nationalistic Ukrainian state to the west, is no longer viable. The only thing that can be left to the west is a weak and neutralized state, so that any residual Nazism there will not be politically threatening to the Russian world again. Things have reached that stage, and I'll give you some more symptoms of this, some more, if you like, indications of this. My friends who are back in Russia, they were in a rural city which will be nameless, were struck by the number of fresh graves in the local cemeteries. Now, these were ordinary Russian people, not part of the Moscow or St. Petersburg elite, which so far has been relatively unaffected by the mobilization campaign for various career reasons and so on. But the ordinary people have certainly been going to the front in large numbers, and the dead have been coming back. Now, there's a well-accepted figure now of 400,000 Kiev regime dead and 50,000 Russian dead, a 1 in 8 ratio. Forget about ratios. Just think about those 50,000 Russian dead. Every one of them loved, cherished, with families, with parents, with wives and children. They're gone, those 50,000. How are the Russians reacting to this? Is there an anti-war movement? Are there people saying, we can't go on doing this, this is terrible? No, there isn't. There isn't. There is respect and admiration and love for the families of these dead 50,000 young Russian men. Their children will grow up in a welcoming atmosphere of love and respect for what their fathers did. This is what I'm hearing from my Russian friends. This is not my invention. There is a sense that we are a country now which is at war. Our young men are making the ultimate sacrifice in this war. We will never stop respecting and honouring them and doing what we can to bring this war to a proper end. Now, obviously, that's not the opinion of everybody in Russia. And I was told that there's believed to be 1 million Russians, not 300,000, who've left the country for one reason or another. Now, not all of them have left formally as it were, refuseniks who leave the country for good and make a lot of noise about it. A lot of them are living quietly in various parts of the world, in places like Phuket and Bali. They're lying low. They're living off their savings. They're waiting for things to get better, and then they'll quietly go home. But the point of it is, the people who are left in Russia are the people who are fully committed to what is happening. Another indication, I was just reading Maria Zakharova's latest press conference from yesterday. And what struck me, I mean, Maria's a pretty strident woman, very, very strong, passionate woman. I've met her at a conference. But she is absolutely implacable these days. When you read her rhetoric, when you read what she says about the war criminals and what they're doing in Ukraine, this is not the voice of a government that's disposed to settle for anything less than a total resolution of the Ukrainian problem. I didn't say victory deliberately because the Russians don't regard this as a victory. They don't regard the Ukrainians as their enemy. Even though they're forced to kill them in huge numbers, that's a military necessity for Russians. And it is still not a war for them. It is a brutal, implacable, special military operation, and it will continue to the end. What is the end? I agree with you. It's hard to see Odessa being left within rump Ukraine after all this. And the fact that there were major air raids in the last few days on a little river port between Ukraine and Romania. Look, I forget the name of it. It's four letters, but it's a major river port and was a major entry point for Western supplies into Ukraine. That is, of course, the western limit of Odessa province. And I think Odessa province is definitely going to go to Russia. What will be left of the rump Ukraine? Not just territory, but territory under a effective security system which will prevent it ever militarizing itself or being militarized by NATO against Russia again. So we're looking at two parts of the solution: territorial solution and a political resolution in the area that remains in rump Ukraine. I don't think the Poles will move in. I think they certainly might speculate about it, but if they have a rump Ukraine pretty much neutralized, I think they'll close the books on the history and let it go.
Excellency Tony Kevin, it's been fascinating to talk to you at length, and I hope it's not long before we talk again. Thanks for joining us at this early hour down under in Australia Fair. US and Canada numbers +1 844 944 3344. UK and Ireland number 08081 965522. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Some comments on Ambassador's interview. June Robertson says, poor Julian Assange, totally abandoned by his own country. Shame on Australia. And Derek Sarath says, Assange work must not stop with this. We must continue to badger our elected officials. Jack Klugman, great name, says the UK security state wanted Assange as much as the US and many other governments. I knew he was in trouble when he published Israeli government cables. And John Cumberbatch says it's not just us here in the UK. It would seem Australia too picks up the bar of soap for America. Been a kind of a running theme, that, if a little sordid. I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Well, you can get the film on DVD from my shop at georgegalloway.com, and I think you can still get it on Amazon and the like. But the fastest way to see that film is to support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Not to find a point on it, just for the price of a cup of tea per week, you can support me, and I need your support. I'm not going to beg you for it, but I'm going to tell you that I need it. And you've got to ask yourself, can you afford to give me the price of a cup of tea per week to keep me going? If you can, you then need to ask yourself why you won't. Patreon.com/George Galloway. And you get Killing Kelly thrown in for free. And pretty soon, you'll get my first film, The Killings of Tony Blair, entirely free on Patreon also. Andrew has not been redeemed by the royal family. Say 2/3 and more of the respondents on our poll. Thank you for voting. An email at onair@moats.tv from Zibo has arrived. Good evening, George. Thank you for your courage to face the powers that be with the absolute truth. I'd like to ask, where are those loud environmentalists and climate change watchers, and how much noise they are making about this dangerous move by NATO? Can we hear them, please? Regards, Z.H. Diamini. I'm afraid we can't, and almost certainly won't. Eve is now in Florida these days, and he's on the line, more importantly, here to the mother of all talk shows. Eve in Florida on nuclear war. Go ahead, Eve.
Yes, I wanted to keep the discussion of last Sunday. What I wanted to say is that America has been working very hard to keep its hegemonic position, the position that they have after World War II. So that position is control of all the important organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, 60% of the seats when you have 10% at most of the population, and so on. They know that after a nuclear war, they won't have that position because it will be a complete reset, a complete redistribution of the wealth of everything. So I do not believe that America is looking for a nuclear war, and I think they will try to prevent it. But in a run to a nuclear war, America makes a lot of money. Because when the tension heightens, and you can see the ruble and things like that, when the tension heightens, the dollar is always strong. And even if they lose $100 billion to Ukraine, the appreciation of the dollar largely compensates for it. So we are in a strange situation where before nuclear war, it is favorable to the US, but I think after it is a disaster. And I think even the neoconservatives know that. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, of course, it takes two to tango and two to avoid using nuclear weapons. And what I was trying to imply, I'm sorry if you inferred otherwise, or if I in any way misled anyone otherwise, if there's an exchange of nuclear weapons in the theater of Ukraine, it will be, the first use will be by Russia, because Russia is the one that is existentially threatened by, and explicitly so, the NATO plan to not just regime change the government in the Kremlin, but even worse than that, to dismember the country, to break it up into little mini states, to balkanize Russia, and for the same purpose that the Balkans was balkanized in the first place, the better to control them and to steal their resources and to keep them permanently weak and at each other's throats. That's the fate that awaits Russia if it is defeated by the NATO armed forces in Ukraine. And therefore, I'm saying to you, without fear of contradiction, without having been told this by anyone in Moscow, my understanding of Russia, which is more than 50 years in the making, is this: that if Russia seems at any stage to be in danger of losing the war, by which I define, for example, the fall of Crimea, a part of Russia since Catherine the Great, the fall of Crimea would trigger, in my view, absolutely certainly, the firing of nuclear weapons by Russia against the invading force and against perhaps those that were enabling and facilitating that nuclear force, particularly the yapping statelets of the so-called Baltic Republic, Baltic states. So I'm not saying America is going to launch a nuclear war, but if Russia begins a nuclear war, it's very hard to see how the United States will not respond. And each side will then respond with bigger and bigger nuclear weapons. And that escalation only ends definitively in one place, and that end is the end for all of us. I am certain that Russia will no more accept being conquered by its Western enemies than it accepted the invasion of Napoleon, and more appositely the invasion of Adolf Hitler and the Wehrmacht, who in Operation Barbarossa swept to the gates of Moscow and Leningrad themselves, captured the Caucasus, raped Odessa, 165,000 Jews in Odessa when the Romanian SS and German SS arrived 5,000 Jews alive in Odessa when the city was liberated by the Red Army in 1944. The Russians will not go into that good night quietly. They have never surrendered to foreign invaders, and Vladimir Putin doesn't look to me like the sort of fellow who would be ready to surrender to invasion by Joe Biden and Rashid Sunak. Do you get my drift? Eve in Florida, thanks for that call. Paul says, if the British government wants Russia to give territory to Ukraine, perhaps it could show a good example by returning Gibraltar to Spain and the Malvinas to Argentina, says the wise man Paul Brown in Sheffield. David is in Portland and has some thoughts on the show. Go ahead, David. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. I might not be able to get to the second thing, but the first thing I wanted to talk about was, sounds ridiculous, but the fear that I felt in subscribing to you before I subscribed to you. You know, I was always tracing issues down to their root, and seeing you confront the military-industrial complex and, you know, your Oxford talks, and seeing that you have the history to back up what you talked about. As years went by, I finally felt comfortable enough to subscribe. It's been 2 years now or so, and I'm hearing that there's still so many people that watch this show that haven't subscribed. If there's one of you out there that was like me, that was, I feared retaliation by my nation, you know, like very easy to track people online nowadays. But I have faced no retaliation just for following George Galloway. I'm much more of less of an armchair activist now. I actually go out in my community and do things. They're much more scared of grassroots activism and actual change, not just following George Galloway on YouTube. Please subscribe. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about too, though, was your possible secession. You know, I hope that you'll be around forever, but I worry about, you know, EU's censorship protocols and stuff like that. Who is your next in line? Who will commandeer the movement? Will it be a family member? If so, I would like to see their face and, you know, get warmed to them before, you know, something happens to you, and then this whole following is left without anyone. So who will grab the reins?
David, I feel I'm being measured for something here, and I'll come to your very pertinent second point in a minute. But I'm deeply grateful to you and wholly understand your earlier anxiety. But it does surprise me that a show which is watched by now more than 2 million people every week, I suppose the average would be about 1.8 million, but that average is about to shift, I think, as the summer holidays come to an end. Last couple of weeks have been over 2 million. That I can't get to 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. That does surprise me. I wonder if there's algorithmic skullduggery going on the part of YouTube. I don't know. I told you at the beginning, near the beginning of the show, that the Rumble audience last week was double the YouTube audience, when the YouTube audience used to be 10 times greater than the Rumble. So I think in terms of the platforms that we're using, and we're on virtually every platform known to man, and most of them are actually not known to me, for although you were kind enough not to say it, I'm getting on, and many of these platforms I've honestly never heard of, wouldn't know how to find them, but we are on them all. I have a young team, many of whom are my family members, and I'll come to that in a minute, but others not, and they are wizards, and whatever the female equivalent of a wizard is. They are so clever that they speak in tongues in front of me. At least that's how it sounds to me. They're actually talking techniquese, and they talk it so well, they act it so well, and they are responsible. Obviously, I produce the raw material, and without that there would be no show. But it would be no use me talking to an empty crowd. They're the ones that have built over now these years, coming up to the 300th edition, just before Christmas, 17th of December, will be our 300th edition. In this form, although this show has been going since 2005, believe it or not, in so many different iterations. But it does surprise me I can't get to 300,000. It does surprise me I've only got 45,000 followers on Instagram. I have got over 800,000 followers on Facebook, but most of them are never shown my material by Mr. Zuckerberg and the former Deputy Prime Minister of Britain, Nick Clegg, who's his chief of censorship. So these things do surprise me a little. It does surprise me that only 550 people can afford the price of a cup of tea to give me support on Patreon. But I keep going because the most important thing to me is that the audience keeps on growing, and the influence, therefore, of what we're saying and trying to lead the way with on this show is successful. And as long as that's the case, and as long as God gives me breath, and you're right, the older you get, the more chance there is that there won't be a next year, and so on, of course. My good wife, Gayatri, who's the brains behind this show, without whom this show would not exist, who does so many things other than just co-producing this show, that I literally don't have time left in the show to list them. But Gayatri used to present a program with me. Unfortunately, you can no longer see it, I think, because of the ban on RT, which used to broadcast the show, though it was made for AP, Associated Press, the American multinational. But because it appeared on RT, it has been banished, I think, into the memory hole. But many of you may remember her co-starring with me on that show, which was called Sputnik, Orbiting the World with George Galloway. We are, as it happens, correctly predicted by you, planning succession planning. My good wife will be in charge of that. My son, who's only 16, but taller than me, more handsome than me, and more voluble than me. We've just got to learn to control how voluble and in what directions. But we're working on that. He is studying media and business at A level, as well as English, at which he excels. And in time, I hope that he will fill this chair along with Gayatri when I'm no longer able to. But put this in your pipe and smoke it, David. I say that in the nicest possible way. My good friend Larry King was still presenting very good television well into his 80s. In fact, past his mid-80s, if I recall. I hope to do that, in which case you've got another 16 years of me, if God spares me. Of course, no one can guarantee that. Not you, not me, not the youngest person watching this show can guarantee they'll still be here on Sunday. But I hope to be. David, thank you for that. Now, mentioning tea on the show has sparked a debate in the chat. So let me clarify. This is rooibos tea, which is the only tea that I drink. And it's natural, without caffeine. It is pure dead brilliant, as we say in Glasgow. Hong Luong says, I wonder if GG will give his insights in the G20. President Xi isn't attending and Zelensky isn't invited. Well, that doesn't mean he won't show up, of course. President Xi is being represented by the Premier of China, no mean figure. The second most important person in China is something to be. And I suspect that the reason is the same reason that the Chinese defense minister will literally not pick up the phone to Lloyd Austin, his US counterpart. Because the Americans think they can sanction the Chinese defense minister and talk to him on the phone at the same time. And that is not how China operates. So I suspect it's a wish not to meet with Joe Biden, who will be there, although he may not know it. And careful, he doesn't walk off the end of the pier. Crowhawk says testicular injuries in women's sports have seriously escalated over the last 5 years. We need to examine why that is. Well, I'm not a gynecologist, but I'll take a look. Vanessa is in New York. Let's hear from her on Biden and Trump. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. It's such an honor. Thank you. Big fan. I'm calling. I am an American, but I am not a Trump supporter, and I am not a Biden supporter. So I'm coming at this as someone who is looking for serious change. So, but one thing I've noticed is that in 2018, Donald Trump did send out a tweet, and I'm reading it right now, where it says, I am happy to lift the ban on ZTE and bring Chinese jobs back to China. ZTE was the telecom company that was under the same ban as Huawei. And much to both parties' chagrin, he did lift those sanctions. And that was days after AP reported that a Chinese company had invested $500 million into an Indonesian resort that is actually now open for business, and it had licensed the Trump brand, and so that is now open for business. I just,
well,
it's
nice work if you can get it.
Nice work if you can get it. So my main point is just quid pro quo is run amok. There are no there are no innocent parties here. Once you're sleeping in the White House, you have dirt all over you.
I think that you're absolutely correct, Vanessa. And for the avoidance of doubt, I'm on the same page as you. I'm not a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter. If I had a preferential ballot, I'd vote for Robert F. Kennedy 1, Dr. Cornel West 2, Donald Trump 3, and Joe Biden or Kamala Harris 4. That would be where I come from. If I had a vote, and if it were possible to rank by preference one's choice. And I absolutely agree that Trump is an utterly, totally transactional person and has been all of his life. But at least he never tried to hide that. Biden claims to be the blue-collar guy, the union guy, the labor guy, the guy for black people and other minorities, and it's all a pack of lies, Vanessa. That's my point.
100% on board with you. I've been listening to your show. I'm very happy I found it. I'm only a listener for about a year and a half now, but I fully agree. I am heartbroken. I'm heartbroken over all of it, but I agree. I just thought that was interesting with Huawei coming through with their new phone, which I thought was it's an incredible win for China. And, I just hope that we can find a way to work together. That's all. It is.
Thank you, Vanessa. China has triumphed in the war of the semiconductors. They thought that they could put China effectively out of the game by sanctioning the semiconductors, many of which are, of course, produced in Taiwan. What first attracted you to the multi-millionaire Paul Daniels? His widow was once asked, what first attracted you to the semiconductor-rich Taiwan, Mrs. Truss, Mrs. Pelosi. But the Chinese have overcome it. The new Huawei 6G, that's 6G, is off and running. China cannot be stopped. It's moving like a train forward, and a Chinese train at that. And blimey, they go fast, and they are very efficient indeed. Vanessa in New York, don't be a stranger. I'd love to hear you again. YouTube comments regarding the poll. June Robertson, Andrew does not need to be redeemed. He is a sick man. And Azure Sky says, how's Charlie's 45% pay rise doing? And Paul Metz Cohen says, I imagine Prince Andrew's behaviour is not out of the ordinary for the British royal family. I think you're right there, Paul. DW says, GG, a year today you were warning of a nuclear war should Truss win. Well, she hasn't the power to fire a nuclear weapon. Britain has nuclear weapons, but only the Americans can fire them. Final call, I suppose, is from Chicago, where Mike wants to talk about Donald Trump. Go ahead, Mike.
Salutations. Well, I wanted to say that I think Trump will win the next election, and he's going to end the war in Ukraine in one day. And it's going to be like a parent ending a fight between his 6 and his 8-year-old. And it's going to be a terrible peace, really, for both countries. I think that he will let Putin declare victory and give him some sort of a military gain. And for the Ukrainians, it's going to be total humiliation. Anything that they fought for and got land-wise out of this, they are going to automatically lose. They're going to see the futility behind everything that they did, because I think after that they're going to understand that they were scapegoats.
Well, I agree with you that Trump will end America's support for the war, and I entertain the hope that he will end America's support for NATO and bring it to a close, for NATO is the fundamental problem here. It's why I and Chris Williamson founded No to NATO, No to War, which is going great guns, if you'll forgive the pun, is growing and growing because more and more people can see that it's the very existence of NATO, and more particularly its overweening ambition to expand and expand and expand, even hoping to open an office in Tokyo, as far from the North Atlantic as it is possible to go, making deals with Australia over nuclear submarines to confront China and so on. Talk about out of area. NATO is the key. I agree that Trump will end US support for the Zelensky regime, but I don't think he has the power to stop Russia from achieving its goals, which in any case will be long achieved, in my opinion, by the time President Trump comes to office, if indeed that's how it turns out. I wish I had longer to deal with the points that you make, and made very well, but I mustn't go over my time this time. I just want to leave you with this thought. The revolutionary government in Niger has just increased the price of uranium that it exports on the world market to 200 euros per kilogram. It was previously paying, or rather charging, 80 cents. The French were getting Niger's uranium for 80 cents per kilogram, and the world market price is 200 euros per kilogram, which is what little Macron will have to pay from now on. You see, it pays to stand up for your rights. That's what the people in Niger have done. It remains to be seen if the people in Nigeria will now do the same. I'll be talking about that, I'm sure, on Sunday. If God spares me, God willing, I'll be back on the mothership on Sunday at the earlier time of 7 p.m. UK. I'd like to ask you, as I always ask you, to please bring me one more viewer. There must be a member of your family, a member of your circle, a workmate, a parishioner, who you can persuade to check out the mother of all talk shows. Good night.